I create new videos each week, so don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell. Welcome. So this video is going to deal with the top 10 drumming myths of all time. So just to be clear, this is not myths about drummers. It's not about Keith Moon throwing the TV out of the 30-story hotel window. It's not about Buddy Rich leaving the trombone player on the side of the road. It's purely about common falsehoods surrounding drumming technique. It's stuff that your teachers just assume that you know. So it was never really focused on. When I say to a student, what is the study of coordination on the drums, most of them will come back and say something like, it's developing your independence between your limbs. And that's not exactly what us drummers do. Therein lies the myth, that coordination is the study of independence between all your limbs on the drums. Here's the challenge with that statement. Independence suggests that each limb is playing some kind of pattern and none of them relate to each other. That's really what independence is. This limb is playing something completely independent of this limb. So you notice for this example of independence, everything just sounds like a mess and just completely is falling apart. There's no cohesive groove there. What we talk about on the drums is interdependence. Interdependence is the idea that each limb is playing a rhythmic figure, but each of these rhythms and each of these limbs work together to make one unified groove. Now while we're looking at interdependence, notice that all the rhythms, even though they're complicated, are working together to create a groove. So remember, if anyone ever asks you about coordination on the drums is about interdependence between your limbs, not independence. Now the next drumming myth that we're going to talk about deals with counting. The myth is the idea that counting in your head while you're playing is easier than counting out loud. And this is something that most drum teachers get from their students all of the time. It's the infamous, oh, it's okay, I'm counting in my head. Now I'm here to tell you as a professional drummer and teacher, and I'm sure every teacher I know would agree with this, counting in your head accurately is far more difficult than counting out loud. Now notice I preface that with the word accurately, because tons of people could count in their head wrong. In fact, counting in your head wrong is really easy. The ability to count in your head is something us drummers call internal clock. And this has to be developed. And the first step to developing your internal clock is training yourself to be able to count out loud over everything you practice. This takes a lot of time and a lot of energy to develop this and get this right. But once at any point you could count something out loud and be completely comfortable with no fear that you're going to mess up the count, that's when you can really start counting in your head. And I'm here to tell you that when I'm counting in my head, at any point, I can verbalize or count that out loud without skipping a beat. No pun intended. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. The next myth I want to talk about centers around odd time signatures. Now this is the kind of thing that when I mention an odd time signature to a student, or I say something like, let's play this in 7/8, you see that look of dread just come over a student's face, like, odd time. I might be exaggerating, but generally when you start talking about odd times, it instills a lot of fear. And honestly, I feel like that's an unnecessary fear. So the myth is, when you're talking about the odd time signatures like 7/8 or 5/8 or 9/8, these are very complicated, complex, and advanced topics for advanced players only. And honestly, it's just simply not true. It all depends on how you think about the odd time signature. I've been in tons and tons of situations where bands called on me to play odd time signatures. But I'm also going to tell you I haven't spent a ton of time in the practice room developing my playing in odd time signatures. And the reason for that is because of how I think about it. Let's start with the way that most drummers think about it. When you talk about 7/8, most drummers will turn around and say something like, okay, 7/8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. And that's not wrong. That's definitely like the Neil Peart way of counting it. And I'm not knocking Neil. I love his playing. I think what he does is great. Now let's talk about the way I think about odd times. And what I do is I relate it back to the most common time. And the most common time is 4/4. That's the time signature that most of us are completely comfortable in. So let's talk about the time signature of 4/4. 4/4 means that each measure has to add up to 4 quarter notes. So if my tempo is here, 1, 2, 3, 4, those would be quarter notes. Now let's go ahead and count that same measure in eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. For those of you that weren't paying attention, that's 8 eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now let's go ahead and switch that time signature to 8/8. Pretty much the same time signature, you're just going to count each eighth note as a beat. Instead of 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, you're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Notice it's the same speed. In fact, that's the way dancers tend to count off time, if you notice. 5, 6, 7, 8. Not the way musicians do it, generally, but in the dance world, 8/8 is the more common time. Okay, now I'm going to do some really tough math. What is 8 minus 1? That's right, 7. So if I take that 1/8 note away from 8/8, you get 7/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that means that 7/8 is only 1/8 note away from 8/8. And since 8/8 is the same thing as 4/4, if we take the last eighth note out of 4/4, you get 7/8. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. There's no end of 4. The end of 4 now is removed. So now if I feel that more in a 4/4 feel, like the quarter note, you're going to get this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1. Now there's your 7/8. Now I'm going to feel it without the eighth notes in between. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Notice it's a lot more of a round count. It feels more like the way you play 4/4 time. Of course, it's got that skip in it, but that's the nature of all odd times. So you just have to have the ability to follow the 1. Move your time to the 1 without playing the end of 4. Now this pretty much works across the spectrum with all kinds of odd time signatures. 5/8 I relate to 6/8, because 6/8 is definitely more the way I'm comfortable feeling that type of time signature. I just take the beat 6 out of it. And that's only one way of thinking about it. There's actually a couple of ways you could think about it that relates it back to more of a common time. 9/8 is the same thing as 4/4, but we're adding an extra eighth note to it. Easy to feel if you think of it that way. And when you do it like that, time signatures aren't quite as advanced as most people would lead you to believe. You don't have to have that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 feeling in your playing. If you listen to guys like Fenichel or Virgil Donati, when they move inside of a time signature, it doesn't have that very robotic changing of rhythm, where it really emphasizes the skip. It just kind of flows over the 7. Now I don't know if this is the way Vinny thinks of it, but it's the way I needed to think of it to sound like Vinny, if that makes any kind of sense. Oh man, now with this one I could already hear all the nasty comments coming in. And the myth is that your counting has to match your time signature. Now I'm going to tell you right now, I've recorded tons of videos in the past where my counting didn't match the time signature that I had in my written music. And can I tell you, so many comments were so focused on my counting that they lost sight of actually getting something out of the lesson. And it became threads and threads about, oh, your counting doesn't match the time signature. You're counting in 4, but you're in cut time. You're counting in this way, and the time signature is this. It doesn't make any sense, and I'm so confused. Here's what you have to realize. The time signature doesn't necessarily kick in until you hit beat 1 of that song. Until that chart starts playing or the band starts playing, the counting isn't really anything. It's just a counting. Now this goes back to what we just talked about with odd time signatures. If I'm playing in 7/8, you can count the band in 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1. But I guarantee you, if it's a band that you haven't ever played with before and you try to do it like that, somebody's gonna mess it up. Now the way I do it, if I'm playing with a band, especially in a situation if I'm sitting in or I'm reading a chart and say the chart's in a 7/8 or an odd time, I count it in like this. 1, 2, ready, play. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You do it that way, nobody messes it up. Everyone comes in and then you're into the 7/8 after that. Now is that wrong? No. As long as everything's clear. You gotta remember, written music exists to help a player play the music that they're supposed to play. Ergo, written music is a tool for playing. Playing isn't a tool for written music. So the counting could be anything you want. Make it a tool for making sure the band all agrees on the downbeat. And once you're in on the downbeat, you could be in whatever time signature you need to be. And, listen, if you're a classical player and you completely disagree with what I'm saying and you want to leave me a nasty comment, go ahead. This drum myth is a big one, and it's something that really screwed me up as a younger player. And the myth is about sticking. It's the idea that a sticking pattern is the same as a rhythmic pattern. Ergo, stickings are rhythms. Now that's simply not true. And again, this messed me up as a young player because I was all about licks and going fast and sounding impressive when I was a kid. I just wanted to be as fast and crazy sounding as I could, so when I went to the music store or I played a talent show or something, I could wow everyone with my chops. The challenge is, a lot of those chops that I had were sticking patterns. They were things that were based around my rights, my lefts, my feet, and combinations of those. And although they sounded really cool when you played them fast, they had no basis in time. Now what you have to remember is a drummer's job is to keep the beat. So whether you're playing a drum solo or a fill or a groove, your job is to keep the time, keep the beat. And if you can't do that with the licks you're playing, then you got a serious problem. So just make sure, whenever you have a cool sticking pattern that you're developing, make sure to develop how it fits inside of a rhythmic framework. This is something else that I've gotten a lot of pushback from when I talk about it, even with some students. And you might disagree with me on this. The myth is about flams. It's the idea that a flam has to be two notes that strike the drum slightly askew. And you put the grace note slightly before the accent. That is the definition of a flam. Well, I'm here to tell you that that's not exactly true in every practical situation. Now you see what I mean about everyone racing to the comment section to tell me I'm completely full of shit? So let me explain. A flam is a sticking feeling. It's a feeling inside of the sticking category. And flams, just like rolls, have a range. So an open flam could be as far apart or as far askew as even a 16th note. Granted, that would be a very open flam. But you could really separate those notes. Now all the way on the other side of the spectrum you have a closed flam or a popped flam. That's when both hands come down exactly at the same time. We call that a pop flam because if both sticks come down on the same surface, you get a weird rebound, a weird pop back. You also get an awkward sound out of the drum because the contact of the sticks at the same time kind of cancel each other out, and that makes the head vibrate very differently. But a closed flam works fine if you're on two different surfaces, like say a snare drum and a tom-tom, or a snare drum and a hi-hat, or dare I say, a bass drum and a snare drum at the same time. That's right, folks. Unisons technically can be looked at as flams. In fact, for some exercises, I find that a lot easier to develop the exercise thinking of these as flams versus thinking of them as unisons. So I teach my students that a flam has a range, from closed, which is completely at the same time, all the way to open, where the notes are very askew from each other. And I'm going to tell you right now, the more open a flam is, the dirtier or grittier the sound you're going to get. You know, it adds a little bit of grease to the fill. Here's another one that I get from students. Now, it's not something we usually talk about. It's something more that they do when they're reading. So if I put a piece of marching music or something in front of a student and say, "Can you read this?" Most of the time, when they get to a drum roll, immediately their hands start going fast. They do what I call a Hail Mary roll. That means they'll be playing a figure and they'll just play the roll as fast as they can and pray that they come out on the right beat. So the myth centered around drum rolls is that drum rolls have to be played fast. And that's not true. A drum roll, which is a rudiment, is just a sticking. Now remember what we said about stickings before? Stickings are not rhythms. Stickings are just patterns. So a drum roll is right, right, left, left, if you're talking about an open drum roll. Of course, just like we talked about with flams, if you close the drum roll, you get a multiple bounce roll, where it's just a series of rights, at least 3 or more, and a series of lefts. This has nothing to do with speed, so I'm telling you right now, this can be a drum roll. And when you're reading, the reading's going to assume that you're playing inside of a rhythmic structure. So you have to play that roll as fast or as slow as the tempo or beat dictates. Drum rolls aren't always fast, kids. Sometimes they're really slow. Now, since we're on the topic of talking about going fast, here's another myth. Certain notes are faster than others. And if you want to specify that a little bit more, 30-second notes are really fast. Now, once again, just like sticking, the notes don't really have any bearing on the speed. The speed is determined by the tempo. What is the tempo? The tempo is the speed of the beat. The notes can only go as fast as the speed of the beat dictates, and how they relate back to the time signature. When I say to a student, play me some 30-second notes, this is what they usually do. Then I'll come back and say something like this. Here are some 30-second notes. 1, E, and, Remember, the notes are relative to the beat, and the beat is at a certain tempo. If the tempo is extremely slow, 2, E, and, then the notes are going to be really slow. If the tempo is faster, then of course the notes are going to be faster in relation to that beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, since we're talking about the beat and we're bringing up the beat a lot, let's talk about some myths that surround the beat. And the myth is the beat is something you play on the drums. Now again, before you start running to the comment section and start threatening my children or whatever, let's break it down a little bit. When I talk about the beat here, I'm talking about the musician's definition, the technical definition, not the layman definition when you talk about a rock beat. As in, oh, the cool drum beat for that song, or the drum groove. In fact, with my students, I really try never to say drum beat, because I find that gets a little confusing. I call beats grooves. Even though that's still kind of a layman thing, it just separates the idea of the beat and the groove as being two different things and not the same thing. So what's the beat? The beat is the pulse. The beat is the time. The beat is the count. All three of those things are the beat, none of which you actually play when you're performing drums. It's something you give to start the band, or something that's given to you, say by a conductor or a metronome. So here are some examples of the beat. This is the beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the beat. So now keep that in mind. The beat is not something that you play. It's something that you play over. And that's going to bring us to our last myth. And probably, I think, the biggest one and the most important. Whenever I have a new student come in, and this is going back since 1998 when I started teaching, I ask my students a series of questions. And this is part of the evaluation process. This is how I kind of get to know what they know on the drums before I start teaching them. The very first question I ask them is, what is rhythm on the drums? And I'm looking for the technical definition, I'm not looking for the layman definition. And I'm going to tell you that in like 99% of the cases, most drummers completely get this wrong. In fact, before I even talk about it, I want you in your head, without looking it up or anything, define what rhythm is. I'll give you a second. Stop the video if you need to. Okay, so what's the answer that you came up with? I'm going to tell you as a teacher, most of the time, the answer I get is the rhythm is your ability to feel the time. How well you feel the beat. Ergo, the rhythm and the beat are kind of the same thing. This is not correct. I'm not very big on right and wrong because a lot of things are very subjective in music, but this is one of those things that's not subjective. And assuming you're a student and you're not a teacher that's been teaching for 30 years and really knows his stuff, this is something that a lot of aspiring drummers don't get right. And I'm not even going to limit that to drummers, because I've had plenty of musicians where I've asked that question to, and it knocks them on their ass. And the challenge lies in the layman definition of rhythm. When most people in general think of rhythm, they think of a dancer. They think of somebody's ability to clap. They think of somebody's ability to move. Wow, that dancer's got great rhythm. They'll even say it about drummers. That drummer's got a great sense of rhythm. That implies that the rhythm is how he feels the time or feels the beat. That's not what rhythm is in music. So what is rhythm if it's not how you feel the beat? Rhythm in music is notes. It's the notes that you see on the page, or the notes that you actually perform when you're actually playing the drums. Now, notes aren't rhythms unless they're played over the beat. If notes are not played over a beat, they are patterns, stickings. So the beat and the rhythm are two different things. The beat is the count, the beat is the time. The rhythms are the notes that you play over that time. Now, if you're a little more experienced and you knew that, good for you. I'm telling you right now, from a teaching standpoint, so many students fumble and fall apart on that one. A lot of times I get, oh man, I should know this. And yes, you should. But you know what? Now you do. And because of that, you should return the favor, throw this video a huge like, and subscribe to my channel. And don't forget to ring the stupid notification bell too. Thanks for checking out this video. I'm Fenichel. Remember to always practice with purpose. Now, as I mentioned in that last myth, I take each of my students through a very serious evaluation. And what I've done is I've actually taken that evaluation process, digitized it, and turned it into a quiz or a test. And you could take this test completely for free at thedrummersalmanac.com. So I encourage you to go over to thedrummersalmanac.com and take my Drumming Foundation Challenge.